How's it going, guys? Welcome back to Demo RPG. We're up to episode 9, and today we're just going to be working on an equipment class and getting some armor and weapons ready for our characters to equip. Now, we got a lot of work to do, so let's get right into it. First thing we're going to do is just add a new class, or, well, in our case, a new header, since we're kind of building I guess what's gearing towards a header-only library. So let's just make a new header called equipment and put it right in along with everything. We got to think about this a little bit. First of all, how are we going to do this? We need to think about that. Now, luckily for you, I've thought about this ahead of time for the most part. So I'm just going to show you how to code it all up. I'm going to first give you a little bit of the theory, and then I'm going to code it all up. Okay, so RPG, armor, equipment system. There's a million different ways to do it. Every game has their own little motif of what they do and what they follow. And we're going to follow some of those, but we're also going to kind of come up with our own. So we're going to have an equipment class that we use to inherit from, and that equipment can be many different types of equipment. It can be armor or weapons for the most part. And we're going to call armor as a chest piece, head piece, etc. Also, we're going to put like rings and amulets and things like that in there as well. So we just need to build equipment and then armor that inherits from it, and then weapons. And we also want to have slots because we want to know what slots these items are for and where you can put them. You don't want to be able to put a sword on your leg. Well, I guess when the sheath is there, but you get the point. You don't equip it there. It's a hand item. You just want to be able to make that all make sense. So how are we going to do it? All right, well, let's keep it as simple as possible. Let's make a struct. Actually, let's do class called equipment. All right, and let's just get this worked out. We don't want to be able to instantiate this. So public, private. If we don't want anybody to instantiate this, the easiest way to do it is to just make it and overload a function. Well, later we overload it. And for this one, we're going to make a get type. Get equipment type. We'll just call it get type. And it's going to equal 0. So pure virtual function, you cannot instantiate equipment anymore. That's going to be the whole point of this. And later we'll overload this to say what type it is, whether it's a weapon or armor, because they're gonna be different, and you're often going to want to know, because you could have just a bunch of equipment slot pointers and use polymorphism to make that equipment either weapons or armor. So that's going to be kind of a useful function. Now there's more we could do, like we could delete constructors and stuff, but we're just going to stick with this simple method of leaving a pure virtual function here, so that way you can't instantiate equipment unless you're creating a equipment pointer and then later calling it armor or something. All right, so what's some of the basics we're going to need here? Basically, we're going to need a name, right? Equipment's going to need some kind of name. We'll just use string for this here, and we'll just call it name. So we're going to naturally need to include string, so it knows what that is. Pretty straightforward there. And as you can see, we have that private, so we're going to need getters and setters. And let's see what else. We're going to need, what does an equipment have? What is it going to do? And for the most part, it's going to affect your stats. Mainly armor and resistance, but it's an RPG. We can have magical items or special items, so we also want them to give you some of your stats like strength, intellect, agility, maybe even HP and MP as well, but we'll cross that bridge a little later. For now, we're just going to stick with stats. So we're going to put in core stats, and we'll just have stats. So equipment's going to have stats. Yeah, so later we might have items too that are different, but for now, we're going to stick with just creating this. Now, it doesn't know what core stats are because we have to include it, core stats, class that we've built. We'll just pop back and look at core stats. This is what we worked on last episode with all these overloaded operators and stuff, so that's handy. All right, there we go. Very nice. And so we're going to need some more stuff in here, like we're going to need ways to get and set this, and the easiest way to probably do it is with a constructor, and that's what we're going to stick with. However, we might as well just make it protected, since it's going to be something you need to inherit from anyway, and we can use this constructor that has it all built and ready to go. Standard string, we'll just do lowercase name here, and we'll say you got to pass it in some core stats here. We'll call it CStat. CStats. Sounds like a medical term. And we'll just use this little way of doing it here, where it just create with these directly. And there we go. We now essentially, oh, we need this to be C stats. So we have something that we can inherit from and give a name and stats. And now let's go ahead and make the next part. Now we got to think about this. We need some way to do slots, and it needs to be somewhat exposed. So we're going to make a class for armor slot. So we're going to work on armor first. So armor slot, what different slots can you have? Let's just stick with some basics here. And you know, there's a lot of different slots. So we can pull up Google and go look at medieval stuff. Let me just paste this in here, and we'll see we have all this. So there's some basics to get you started, and here's some more ideas, and you can play other games to get ideas, but ultimately you got to make some decisions about how much of this you want to do and how much you want to call it. You know, these all have a Gothic. This is Gothic plate armor with elements, and you can see a lot of stuff has, well, names that I don't recognize too well because I don't study that, even though I do like the stuff. But we don't want to use all of those. We just maybe want to keep it simple and have a few slots. This is definitely something you can expand on later if you want to add more other slots. But for now, we're just going to use helmet, chest, and legs, and boots. I guess we could have more. Let's go ahead and add ring 1, ring 2, and neck. Those are pretty standard. And yeah, it's an enum. So these are all just numbers essentially. But if you create an armor slot variable, it can only be one of these at a time. And you know, that's a good portion of the stuff, but maybe we also want a few others like shield. And let's see what else. Probably want some kind of gloves. So let's put that over here after boots, gloves, or hands, or whatever you want to call it. I'm just going to stick with the name gloves. Okay, so there we go. We got some basic items. Now it's going to default to helmet if you don't give it anything. So we could give it an undef first one if they haven't defined what it is. But let's just leave that off. We don't really need it in our case. Sometimes we want to have a not set or not defined slot there, or name for your enum. But we're just going to leave helmet as 0, slot 0. Alright, so let's make a class that inherits from equipment. So we go class, equipment, or not equipment, but class armor, and it's going to inherit from equipment. Going to bring in all the stuff, but mainly we just want to use this constructor. We want to overload this get type, and Visual Studio has a little feature where if you right click on your new class and go implement all pure virtuals, it should work, but it doesn't work for this header only method. So we're going to have to just type it in here, get type. Now we're going to do get type a little differently than we were before. Before we were like manually typing in like return armor, right? But we can use some features of C++, at least on Visual Studio. It might be a little different on Linux or different OSs, but you can use type ID. And then you can, in parentheses, put the class or struct. And for this one, since it's inside this class, we can just put star this, and that'll be a reference to this armor class. And then we want dot name. Now this is you're gonna basically return type info must be included before type ID is used. Okay, very good. So we need to include type info. Type info. Okay, and now let's just use this. Now, what type ID returns is going to be class and armor. So it's going to return basically const care of class armor, as you know, it'll look like this when it returns. But we can use that for displaying stuff or checking what it is later. And we might prettyify this a little bit because we don't necessarily want to say class armor, but that's fine. And if this was struct, it would say struct armor. So you'll see that here in a second as we start building this up a little further, and in the end kind of make some tests in our main to see that all this equipment works. So what do we need to do with armor? Well, this should be public. And we should probably also put override here. It's actually optional. Override. There we go. And basically we need a slot. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's just keep this public for now. Oops, I accidentally hit build. Actually, it's there we go. That's fine. So slot, and we'll just call this slot. All right, and then we're going to need, what else are we going to need? We're going to need a constructor. Now, we don't want anybody to default construct this. I don't think if they construct these, they got to at least give it a slot, and they got to fill out this stuff here. So let's just delete some of the constructors here that we know we won't use. So let's just go, or we could just make it private, however you want to do it. There's a couple different ways of getting rid of the base constructor. One of the ways you can do it is you can just make it private. You can just go like this, and oh, I guess we got to give it a little definition. And now it's a private definition. It seems to be complaining about something. It's got some overloads. It says no default constructor. It doesn't let you use this because you don't have a default one for equipment. So we can do that too. We can just go private. Actually, watch this. It's not going to like this private one, and you'll see why here in a second. It's because this doesn't have access to private. Something that's inheriting only has access to protected and public. All the private ones, and it doesn't have access to. But we're going to just move that down there. There we go. And so it's still going to complain. It's going to say it's inaccessible. So it does help you along here. So what do we do in that case? Well, we can just not worry about it. You know, we can just delete this, and we could publicly say armor equals delete. And this is just a little fast way of saying, spell delete correctly, that you cannot use just a default armor. If you create an armor, you've got to create it in a way that has a legal constructor. So we'll get more into that later. Because we could also say no copying is allowed by going something like this: armor const armor by reference equals delete. And that'll say no copying, because this is a copy constructor. That means you can't make a new armor and give it some other armor type to create from. And we can also delete const armor double reference here to say no moving. No moving another armor object into this one. So that just gets rid of some of those base cases. Now, is this correct? No, that's fine. So that gets rid of most of the ways you could create armor. But we need a legal one. And of course, we're going to want it to take a name, stats, and slot. And that's going to be mainly it. So how do we do that? Well, pretty easily, I guess. Basically, we just do what we've been doing in the past, and if you know already, awesome. But mainly, we're going to need this stuff, name, stats. So we can just take what's right here, paste it in here, and we also want this armor slot, because you got to know what slot it is. And we'll just call it slot lowercase and make this one capitalized. All right, and also another thing we're going to do with armor here is we're just going to make it final. And what final does is says no one else can inherit from armor. It's the final version of the class. It's possible we might want to change that later, but for now we just want to make sure no one else is going to be making. If you want a special armor, you just have to design this with the different stats and stuff. Now this sort of ensures that people don't turn your classes into further inheritance. It's just not designed for further inheritance. So that's all it really does. Okay, and we're still working on this here. So we want to instantiate these. Now we can just say, we could just use this constructor and go equipment with name and cstats. And that is going to forward to this constructor right here and end up setting right there. But slot, well, you probably know how to do this one, comma, and then slot, and these double brackets here, but there's nothing actually in here. It just constructs all of this stuff directly. And there we go. We have enough to make all this. Now, how do we want to do this slot? We probably want it private, or do we want people to access it? Now, the thing is, if you leave it just publicly accessible, anyone can change it at any time. Now, if you design something that's a chess piece, we don't want some end user just deciding it's now a helmet. So we probably want to make this private because that makes sense. And then we will want some getters and setters. And same with this. You don't really want anybody changing the name. You don't want anybody just changing the stats, but I mean, maybe you do. It depends on your game. But in our case, we're leaving these private because we don't want people just changing them. But also this means when they're hidden like this, you can't just get to them. So we need getters and setters, which can be a bit annoying to make a bunch of, but hey, it's not that big of a deal really. So let's return a string. Let's just do a get name, kind of like we did before, that just returns name. And we'll do the same thing for stats. Get stats. And it's just going to return stats. Oh, it's We need to return core stats here. Now, this might be a bit overworked. In reality, maybe, you know, like we did so we did these buffs as just a struct, so anyone can access all this stuff just freely, which is going to be kind of nice for internal design if we're not worried about it. Now, then most of this private stuff in general is more for like when you're messing with actual internal stuff that cannot be changed or it's going to bug stuff out. Like if someone sets a pointer wrong or someone, I don't know, changes something that's involved in networking or computer memory or graphics, and it just like whatever it's using, whatever driver or hardware it's using on your computer, if it sets that stuff around wrong, it's going to crash. That's typically the stuff you want to be private. All right, so with that in mind, let's just make them public. All right, that way, you know, if people change these, it's not going to crash our program. So sure, we might not want them to change them, but it's not actually that critical is the point. And maybe you see the point there of you want to hide the more critical stuff that's actually going to cause serious crashes and bugs in general. Now, that's just sort of my take on it. Other people might have different opinions. Maybe people always want to getter and setter. But no matter what you set these to, it's not going to ruin our program. So if you want a piece of equipment that has ridiculous stats and a ridiculous name, then okay, so be it. It's your program. It doesn't matter to me or anybody or your computer. Your computer's going to be fine with it too. So it's, you know, it's not going to break its anything else. But later when we start designing stuff that talks back and forth to the hardware, we got to be a lot more careful about how we do this kind of stuff. And yeah, so that's why we're just going to make them public and say forget about it. And we're going to do the same with slot. So we'll just put these at the top. For now, I like them being at the top because you can just see what you're working with. And maybe we'll put all these unused functions at the bottom. The order does not matter, just whatever one of these it's under is what matters. So once you're in a class, it just knows about everything in its class. So we got the constructor can use, we got get type, and we got about everything else. Now, yeah, so this should work pretty well, and we can assume it's the armor is going to give you the stats. Now, if we go look at stats, in its default construct, which we might end up using, it does something that we don't really intend. So let's just go look at our stat block here, and or rather our core stats. And we see that it sets strength, agility, and intellect to 1 by default. Now, we don't want this anymore because we don't want every piece of armor giving you 1 strength and agility just by default. Well, it gives you 0 by default. It's got to be like magical or something. So this might break a few things with our character and how we use core stats. Because typically we want them to start out with 1, but I think we have most of that sorted out, and if it comes up, we will address it. But so yeah, we're just going to make that little adjustment on core stats of just those defaulting to 0s. So there you go. And yeah, so you might know that a struct, everything's public by default, so that's why we don't have to type public above all these, but in a class, everything's private by default. So in reality, maybe we should just be using structs here. But we've already typed class and it's fine. It's really fine either way. You just got to know that what it defaults to is different. All right, so armor looks pretty good there. Let's think about weapons. Weapons are going to be somewhat similar, except they're not going to take an armor slot. They're going to take a weapon slot. So we need to design a weapon slot. And other than that, they're going to be basically equipment with a name and stats, but also they need to do some damage. So we need to keep track of damage, but that's pretty easy. We can just compose that all in the class. So let's make another enum class weapon slot here. And it's going to take something like, well, what are the different types of weapons? We have one-handers, we got two-handers, and we got ranged. So we'll keep it that simple, all right? So we'll have a melee one-hander, and we're going to have a melee two-hander, and we'll have a ranged slot, and that'll be good enough, and we'll use those. So we'll just do basically what we did with armor here. We'll go class, except this one will be weapon. I'll also make it final, so no one else hear it from it, and also it is equipment as well. And public, we're going to have weapon slot, and then we'll kind of we'll call it the same thing, slot. And we're going to basically do the same thing. We'll have this constructor, except ours is of course going to be called weapon. And it's going to take the same things. It's going to have this name and core stats and slot. I guess we want all of this. We'll just rename that slot here in a second. We'll copy paste action to save some time. Oh, where did slot go? There, okay. Must have hit the wrong key there. All right, here we go. Just paste that in there. and change this to weapon slot. And we're essentially going to do the same thing here. So we can just copy this. Make sure we get this in there, and slot's going to be slot. It's already this new type, so just the same name, but that's fine. And we want to also make this function and put it in here as well. And this should get class weapon on return with this name here. And we can delete these constructors to say, hey, no copying or moving weapons or any of that stuff. And that's easy enough. We can just paste over all these. And, you know, this part is somewhat optional, but we might as well do it. All right, so there we go. Now we have weapons and armor somewhat ready to go. We got base class for them. I think eventually we're also going to go something like this. Public item, and items are probably going to have like weight, quantity maybe, or something like that. But we'll cross that bridge when it comes. We're just going to stick with working on equipment for now. We don't have consumables yet, but we will eventually put in other types of items. All right, but overall, this should work pretty well. So let's design. Oh wait, we need a few more things. Weapons need damage, but let's have a damage range, like a min and a max. So let's just go. We need a damage type. Let's probably use unsigned ints again. We don't want them to do negative damage. Let's go ahead and go over to our types, and we've got stat type. We could use stat type, but actually stat type. We want to be unsigned, so I think we'll go ahead and correct that. I believe we just didn't fix that from a later or something at one point. All right, but let's just make another new one. Type def, because this might change. uint 16 d damage type. All right, and it's the same type, but now if we decide that this needs to be larger, we can just go something like that, and it's easy. But for now, 16 should be good. Let's save a little bit of memory. All right, so there we go. We now have damage type defined, and we can use that over here in equipment and say we have damage type min damage and damage type max damage. And we do need to set those, so maybe we'll just have it right here. And yeah, we'll just have like a damage type min, damage type max, and we just need to be sure to set those. Let's go ahead and break this to a new line. So we got a little more space there, and we'll just go ahead and set these up. Min damage, min, max damage, max, and there we go. That'll default construct those. And yeah, this is the only way to create a weapon is to use this constructor, so you've got to give it all this stuff, and that should be good. Okay, format key looks good. So there we go. Now we've got all that damage ready to go. All right, so let's go over to our main, and we could test out instantiating some of these. But ultimately, we want these to go onto our character. Now, we don't have an inventory yet, so we're just going to have to equip them right away. And the easiest way to do that is probably going to be to put it on the player character delegate and give us some slots. Now we also haven't worked out the different types, light, medium, heavy, what class could use what armor and weapons or any of that stuff. Or maybe we'll have stat requirements, like you got to have at least this much strength to be able to equip this armor, kind of like how Diablo does it. And, you know, World of Warcraft has class and level restrictions. There's a lot of different ways. So we could kind of take inspiration from those and just use whatever works well for us or come up with our own system. Now, it's somewhat up to the designer. But I think what we're going to do for now is just sort of ignore all that. And once we actually start designing more of our real game and have some more theory behind how the armor is going to work and how it's going to be balanced, and same with weapons, then we can start deciding how we want to limit that stuff, or maybe there'll just be none at all, and you know, some stuff will just be obviously, you'll have a lot of intellect on it, so it'll obviously be a caster item. You don't want to put that on a warrior, but we'll have to decide a little later on that. But what we do need to do is think about how we're going to do it on these guys. Now, one of the easiest ways to do it is probably to just put it in this delegate and have it totaled together when you get the armor, and we'll have some ways to equip. So, and then later we could maybe add some checks if we decide you need to be a certain class. If you're if you try to equip something, it's not the right class, it'll just fail. So this is where we start tying this player character stuff all together. Now, how are we going to do this? That is the big question here. Now, ultimately, the goal here would be to do this in as little as code as possible, but still come up with something that works pretty well. So I'm trying to think here the best way to do that. Now, we do have some things we can work with, and it's basically these slots. So we could essentially assume that every character has each of these slots. And then we could just make like an equip weapon, equip armor, and see if they've got the slot filled. If they've got the slot filled, then it will, maybe replace it or something. But if it's empty, an empty slot, I guess that's the one we mainly want to work with right now. We don't really want to start programming and swapping yet. We'll do that later. But we can say if something is empty, we don't have an inventory to pull to unequip stuff really. So we're not really going to worry about the unequip yet, which, it's not going to be working yet, but we're not done. But we can say if that slot is empty, like if you try to equip a helmet, it's going to check if you have one equipped. And if you don't, then it's going to put it on. If you do, it's just going to do nothing probably. So we can design that to begin with. That way we can at least start putting stuff on. And later we'll have to worry about, we have to have an inventory. Once we have an inventory, that's when we can start taking stuff off. Because right now we're just kind of janking it together. And that's going to be fine to start and to get it going. So yeah, this is going to be kind of the hard part. So let's just do that. Let's go up way to the top here and just include our equipment. Now we can say if everybody has the slots, we can put the slots in the delegate, but we probably want to, well, we could also define the functions in the delegate. So this could just be already good to go based on the player character. But as far as totaling up what we've got, we probably need to do that in a different way. Because you can see here, well, yeah, I guess we could design a lot of that in the delegate, but then we'll have to have a PC class and the player character and to equip it to the PC class. Now, if we want to say just like, maybe all the classes have it anyway, we could just do them directly in here. We could just say like equipment star, and now these can be, this is perfect for this. Now, we can't instantiate equipment, right? But what we can do is start it out as a pointer, and then if they equip something, we can end up going something like equipment equals new armor or whatever it is, and then give it all its stats. This is actually going to be legal. So random name, core stat, whatever the stats are, we'll just put the default constructor there. Yep, you can do that, oddly enough. Now, this isn't legal because we're doing this in a class, like we need to put this in a function or something. But I'm just giving you an example of what the code's going to look like. And armor needs a slot type here, or armor type. And we could say like helmet, yeah, that's... Did I spell this wrong? I might have spelled this wrong. Helmet, oh, it doesn't have it. I don't know why I'm putting an N in there. All right, so it'll look something, we could do something like that. And then we're just using some polymorphism to be able to see what type it is. And now when we go get type ID, it's going to return either armor or whatever it is, and that's gonna work pretty well, or equipment. So we'll be able to check what type we instantiated it as. All right, so let's do some of this. All right, so if we're going to try to do this in as little code as possible, we basically want to do some stuff at compile time in case the slots change. Now, it's pretty safe to assume right now that everybody's got every armor slot and everybody's got every weapon slot. Well, the melee might be a little bit different. So we need to have some other flags here. We're going to change this melee just a little bit. We're just going to have melee by itself here. So either a melee or a ranged. But there's going to be another flag in here that we're going to have as a stat, and it's either going to be one-hander, two-hander, or that's pretty much it. Well, we got to think about this a little bit, but yeah, I think we're just going to have a Boolean flag here, or whether it's a one-hander or a two-hander, and that should be simple enough. Is two-hand, and we'll just default this to false. So they've got to change it to true if it's a two-hander. Basically, we're not going to put that in this default constructor or anything. Maybe we will. We'll do it in a way like this, because the stat might be ignored for ranged. I guess there are ranged one-handed weapons, So that'll be a thing too. But for now, we're just going to put is two-hand, and we'll just default it to false. That's fine. Actually, you know what? Forget about that method. Let's do it a different way. Let's do it with a default value type, because that's going to be easier. That way, everything kind of works the same, and we'll just default it to false here. And let's see here, Boolean. We'll just put a. We'll just write out two-handed right here. And then we can default construct that. That'll be fine. I like this method a lot better. It's two-handed, and we'll just put two-handed here. There we go. Now we got a default value there, and we'll just default it to a one-hander. All right, so these enum classes, now they've got a number, and they start at 0. So helmet 0, chest is 1, legs, boots, etc. It goes on. I think we're going to get rid of shield slot for now. It's just going to bring in too many complications overall. We'll work with that later if we need to. But basically what we want to do here is we want to get the number of armor slots. And that's, if everybody's going to have every slot, that's how many of these equipments we'll have. So we'll go equipment, armor, and we'll use an array. But how many are here? That's the question. So basically we want to make it armor slot and the size. So how do we do size? Well, we know, the way you instantiate this is, well, when you type in here, say we put 10, that makes slot 0 through 9 because, well, that's just the way it works. Arrays start at 0, but when you're instantiating them, you got to put the legit number. Like if you put 9 in here, it'd give you 0 through 8. That's just the way these arrays work. So we need a way to be able to tell how many are in here. And the easiest way that I found that will work at compile time, if we change these slots will still work, is we just put a final value here that says like something like last slot don't use or something. We're just going to call it num slots. So this is going to be all of the number of these. And it's the one, we won't actually use this one. So maybe we want to make that clear with a comment. Num slot for making arrays of armor slots. Yeah, something like that. And we'll do the same thing down here in case we add other stuff later. Num slots. You can call this whatever you want. People call this last sometimes. Sometimes they call it, well, let's see here. I'll bring over this Stack Overflow. Pretty common thing people do at compile time here. And so you can do a number of items like that, or this guy, he does it in a kind of weird way that I didn't like as much. I didn't think was clear because you have to +1 it and you have a folders max. Either seems like they would work. But yeah, we're just going to put it as num slots. Now we already know it's armor, so there's no need to retype armor because it's going to be armor slot number slots. All right, so that should work okay. So here we can now put armor slot num slots. So at compile time, it should make an array that is the size of the slots. Now it's not going to include the last slot. Constant has armor slot instead of the required unsigned long. So once an unsigned long. Okay, well, we can do that. We can go unsigned long. If that's what it wants, fair enough. We'll change it to that. So this just does a type conversion there. And yeah, we know that this is going to fit in the unsigned long because it's only going to be 8. Now we can see that this will make an array of size 8, which will be 0 through 7 when we iterate through it. So if we go back to equipment, we can see that this will be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There we go. There is no final slot for the num slots because of the way it counts 0 through 7. So this will actually work quite good. If we try to call an armor num slots, it's going to fail to equip because there's no slot 8. And same with this. Hope that makes sense, but that's a little playing around with enums and arrays that we're going to get to practice with here. So that's pretty cool. So we got armor. Let's make another one for weapons. All right, and this one's going to be, of course, weapon slot, num slots. So this will make a total of 2, one for melee, one for ranged. That's pretty much what we want. And now we need to design some ways to instantiate these. That's going to be the big thing to do now. So essentially we want to initialize these as 0. All right, so we've got some ways of doing this here. We're like custom managing our pointers here. So we got to be very careful about what we do here. Like in our constructor, hold on, actually, let's make a few more. Let's delete some of these other constructors. We want const player character. We want to delete this one, kind of like we did with the other. I don't want people to be able to copy characters in. No. And we want to delete the move constructor as well. And there might be other ones to delete, but we'll cross that bridge when it comes. Mainly those ones. And I'm going to move these all the way to the bottom because we don't really need to see these ones too often. There we go. Let's go way down here. Move them down here. Good enough. Just get them out of our way because we don't really need to mess with them. Alright, so we definitely have to pass in a PC class, but do we have to pass in weapon and armor? No, we don't. And the reason being is, when you make your character, it's going to be naked, basically. It's going to have nothing to you equip stuff. So we got to default all these to nothing. So for each one of these, we need to basically default them to null. And yeah, that should work. So we'll just do some for loops here. We'll probably just use auto. And yeah, we'll just use I. Now we got to do a range loop. My I is less than, okay, so let's do the armor first. We'll use this num slots again. Well, it's less than the number of slots. Then we'll continue on. We'll I++ at the end there. And essentially all we're going to do on this one is just going to make armors at I equal null pointer. That's just going to make sure there's no bad data in there. We need to set this to 0 to start out. There we go. And we'll do the same thing for the weapon. So we'll essentially just copy this down. Call this one weapons. Call this weapon slot. We don't look too far. We can shadow the I variable. It's not that big of a deal right here. It's not exactly clean code, but it's not going to hurt anything to shadow these because this I is scoped into this for loop, and this I is scoped into this for loop, so they're not going to interfere with each other. Although a lot of people will say it's typically bad practice to shadow variables like this, reuse the same one in the same file or the same scope. Or not, well, we're in the scope of this player character class, but then they have their own for loop scope. So, variables resolve to the scope they're in or scopes outside of them. Another thing we could do is if we could just go auto I equals 0 up here, and then we'll just use the same one. We don't declare it here. We just set it to 0 to start, and then we use it. And then when we go to the next one, we set it to 0 and start. And that way we just reuse the same variable over and over. And that's fine too. And then of course when it exits this, it'll destroy. And that might be a tiny bit more efficient because we're not going to recreate the same variable, but it's such a small, minute thing that it doesn't matter a whole lot. But some companies are very particular about how you do this sort of thing. But ultimately, as long as it's clear, it doesn't matter a whole lot, as long as it works correctly and it's clear. But here we're pretty good. So now when we make our new character, it's going to set all these to null pointer as intended. So we're going to need to equip. But we also got to think about our destructor here. So what if these have data in them and our class goes out of scope? Well, whatever data's in these is going to sit around, but the pointers will destroy. So you don't want that to happen because the data will essentially leak at that point as the pointer goes out of scope, but we didn't destroy the data because it's managed in here and we got to manage it properly. So we basically got to do the same thing we did with our PC class and just make sure we delete it. Now, in this case here with the PC class, we're not checking if it's null or not already because there's only one constructor and it's got to be constructed. So it's definitely, if there's a player character class, it definitely has this filled out. So we definitely want to delete it. But in the case of the armor and weapons, there could be nothing in those slots. In that case, it's null. So we essentially want to do the same thing. We'll go back through these loops again, but this time we'll destroy it because we'll say if armor's at whatever this is, if it exists. So that's just going to check if it exists. This will essentially be if not null, and we'll destroy it by just going like this. Armor's at I equals, well, we need to delete first. Delete. Oh, if I can spell. And then set null pointer. Now, let's go ahead and put these brackets in. Let's auto place the last one. But we're going to need 2 lines here because we're also going to set it to null pointer just like we do with our PC class there. Oh, this doesn't work. Delete it and then set it to null pointer. And that will clear the memory out. And we need to do the same thing for weapons, which basically will just take this, except we'll call it weapons instead of armor, and it'll go through all of them and just delete them, but it only deletes them if they exist. If they're already null pointer, if no one ever put anything in that slot, there's nothing to delete. So that will clean up our class with this new armor in mind. But now what we need is a way to equip and de-equip. Now, normally when you de-equip or remove, it's going to go into your inventory. We don't have an inventory, so we'll probably just destroy it at that point. Yeah, that's probably all we're going to do is just destroy it if we unequip. But we'll change it later so that it goes into your inventory or something more like that. So in here, we need some functions to do that. We got a bunch of getters, but these getters don't actually do a whole lot other than, just get you what you would expect. But these all return a copy. So there's no modifications here. The only things I can modify are these here. We probably actually want to, say quite directly what these do. So we'll go modifiers or mutators, sometimes they call these, and these are getters. Getters and setters, mutators, and there's different names here, but we essentially just want to know that, hey, these are for getting stuff. These ones actually make changes to the class. These are pretty obvious here. Deleted constructors that we don't want people to ever use. But now we need modifiers to equip and not equip. And maybe we can return a boolean to be able to tell whether it succeeded or not, because these can actually fail. If they've already got something in that slot, we need to decide what we do. If they already got something in the slot, do you want to, well, and normally if it's legal, we would, just kind of do a, not the code swap. There's a word swap that's a keyword, but when I say swap in this context, I mean, like you put one on and you put the other one in your inventory. We could do that, but we'll do that once we have an inventory. For now, we're just going to, I guess, we'll just destroy the old one for now, because why not? It's not that big of a deal. We'll modify that later when we have an inventory. So we'll put a little to-do at the top of this, just as a fair warning. Update once we have an inventory. Okay. But, we're pretty bad about comments in this. I'm trying to just talk about it all. But in reality, we should probably be leaving comments on these as we go, especially if you're working with a team. That way, if someone goes to work on this, they'll be able to tell what your intention is. Now, with comments, I will say in general with comments, you don't want to necessarily say exactly what it does line by line with your comments. What you generally want is a comment block that says what the intention is and why. So just keep that in mind. Intention and why, not the micro this does this by every line, because that's easier to work with for some people, because they can get the intention and then see what you're doing. And if they want to rewrite it and do the same thing in a different way, they can, and the comment block stays the same. Hope that makes sense. But that's like a rule that a lot of people and companies use that I see quite frequently. All right, so we want equip. Yeah, I guess we just want a plain old equip here. And this will be able to take any equipment. So if we do it as a pointer, we'll be able to tell whether it's an armor or a weapon. So you can just call this one function for both, and it'll try to equip accordingly. So you call equip, you pass it in some equipment pointer, so you'd have to create the equipment first, and then you pass it in. And we also want to think about, okay, so now who manages the memory of this equipment? Well, this class is. So when you equip something, this is going to start managing the memory of whatever equipment you're passing in. So whoever had it previously, they could just destroy their pointer, because For example, if you equip something and someone else also has the pointer, they could delete that. They could delete the data that it's pointing to, and then your equip was valid, but for some reason you now have this bug where your equipment gets deleted because somewhere else in your code, someone else had ownership of it. So you gotta think about that stuff a lot. This is gonna be some nice practice in that area, but this is also kind of one of the points of unique pointers. In general as well is no one else can control it. So it might actually make sense to just make these slots unique pointers so no one else can destroy your items while they're equipped. A lot of bugs like that in a lot of games where they have dupe problems, and it's generally mismanaged pointers because they're letting something else still have control over things they shouldn't have control of, so they can suddenly get like dupe packs and stuff that way. Yeah, so we got to manage this carefully. Is the point? And I think you'll see that. And this is why you want computer scientists on your team, not just some guy who's a casual coder, because they won't understand stuff like this, and you'll have a lot of bugs. So you're learning some important lessons here of how to manage this memory and not to have bugs and weird things happen. So hope you're enjoying. All right, this is getting a little longer than I anticipated, but hey, we're getting really close to the end, and we've done some important work. The last thing we're going to do is get this equip working the best we can. All right, and so, since we're doing something with polymorphism, we can use this particular thing. We can use dynamic cast. So here's a quick setup. Now this isn't perfect. This is just something that'll work to get us started, and if we want to rework it later, then great. All right, so we are going to return a Boolean to be able to tell whether it was successful or not. So if it ends up getting to the end with false, it means it failed. Now, most of the time, it probably shouldn't fail, but we will have a few fail cases in here to say it couldn't equip. We should never hit this false, because essentially, all right, well, here's the thing. To use dynamic cast, you have to have, in the base class of equipment, you have to have at least one virtual function. And if we go look at our equipment, we do have a virtual function right here. So this will work. We also probably want a destructor in here, a virtual destructor. But we're not going to worry about that right now. We're just going to kind of skip over that fine detail. So since we have a base class that can't be instantiated, well, yeah, and it has some virtual function, we can use dynamic cast. So we can whatever equipment we're taking in here, equipment pointer, like if we create armor and then use equip armor, it will see, can it cast it to armor? So if this works, then it's armor. If this doesn't work, it's going to continue on. So if this works and it's armor, we're going to equip the armor. So here we'll basically equip armor, and then we'll return true. So it will not execute this bottom part. But if this is false, or null rather, if this cast fails, then it's going to skip over this block and then see if it can cast it to a weapon pointer. And if it can cast it to a weapon pointer, then this will be an actual value, and we know that we can equip it. And we'll do the equip weapon, and return true. And if both of these fail, and it's going to hit this last thing and just return false. So this is a little system we can use to dynamically equip things. And to fill this out, we just want to be sure that we fill out the right slot for these, for our weapons and armor. So that's all we got to do at this point, really, is just do that. And now we had to decide, what are we going to do if they already have something equipped in that slot and they put something else there instead? Well, we decided for the moment that we're just going to destroy the previous item, because we don't have an inventory to put it into or anything. And we have this little to-do that, we'll fix in a later episode. We don't really have time to do all that right now. We just want to get it generally working. So let's go ahead and equip this. Let's make this equip armor. So we need to know a few things. We need to know which slot it's for, and then we just basically need to put it in that slot. And that's kind of easy to do. We'll just check the slot. So yeah, let's just do that. We'll just go, I'm going to think about this a bit here. Well, we do know that the slot correlates to the same place in the array. So we first need to check if that slot is null. second here. We might be shadowing variables here. Armors, weapons. Let's rename these a little bit. So I'm going to just double R and call this equipped armor. That way it's just really clear what these are. Hit preview here, hit apply. And that's just going to update all these variable names that we previously instantiated. You can do a find and replace if you need to, whatever you need to do. But yeah, I just want to make it really clear because we're going to be reusing the name armor and weapon a lot. So we don't want to accidentally call the wrong one. It's just going to make it really clear. If we go if equipped armor, and then we need to know at what, in what slot. And the slot it's going to be is armor slot. And it's going to want this as an unsigned long, I believe. So it's probably going to be, oh, I spelled it wrong here. Arm. There we go. And it's probably what's an unsigned long here. So it's going to complain a little bit. So we can just do a cast. Well, let's see what it complains about. Operands are mismatched. This is just a null check, basically. I believe we just got to go unsigned long here again. Just cast it to that, because that's what it wants for this array. Yours might be a little different on different compilers. Once again, I'm on, the latest version of Visual Studio at this time. Visual Studio 2022 is v1.3, so compare as needed. And I'm just using C++ 14 here. If you're using something different, or if you're on Linux or Mac or something, yeah, you might get some different errors, and you might have to cast this to a different type. So that's just something to think about, but I'm kind of trying to design this in a way where it's cross-platform friendly. So if we pull all these files and code over to Linux and make a little build setup, it should compile too. That's the goal here, but it might not, because some of the stuff that we're using might be a little different. So just be aware of that. You might have to do a little research down below. If you find something else out that's cool that you think people should know, feel free to leave comments and stuff, because people do read them when they need help. They're stuck on something that I'm doing that doesn't work for them. And it happens. There's no way for me to cover every single case possible when coding like this for a tutorial. It's just not possible. This is too much, too many different scenarios. So, all right. But if there's something here, we're just going to delete it. Yeah. So if it doesn't exist, we'll just equip it. So we need an else case here. So let's think about what these do. If there's something already in the slot, we need to get rid of the old data and put the new one in. If there's nothing in the slot, then we just fill it out with this current armor. So yeah, here, let's go ahead and do this one. We'll call delete, and then we'll set it to null pointer. And then we'll put the new one in, which is going to be basically the same thing. But now we're just going to set it equal to this pointer. Now you can see we're calling this conversion in check a whole lot of times, which is a little redundant. Basically, we want to do this once and it'd be a little bit more efficient. So we could do something like this. Well, actually, yeah, we'll do an unsigned long, because that's what it seems to want. Equals armor slot. And we'll just call this slot num. And of course, we got to cast this to the type at once, otherwise it's going to complain. And there we go. Now we can just use this slot num over and over rather than keep doing the same conversion. It's a little efficient. Your compiler might fix this for you behind the scenes, but I feel like this is maybe a little bit clearer anyway. So can't go too wrong. Oh, we need a ending bracket there. And there we go. At least we don't have to keep doing this conversion over and over. So we do have that going for us, which is nice. All right, so there we go. That will take care of it. That will equip the armor and return true. Now, if we get to this else case, it's essentially the same thing. We just don't need to do all these deletions. We'll just go like this, and there we go. That'll just equip it. And it's going to be essentially the same for armor. So let's just take all this stuff and paste it down here and clean it up. Everything that says armor is instead going to be a weapon. Weapon. This will be equipped weapons or weapon. Let's go check what it's called here. We do have plural weapons, but whatever. We'll just go with it for now. We can do a mass rename later if we need to. So let's do the equipped weapon case here. If they already have it filled out, we delete the old one, then put the new one in. So yeah, we'll put a quick to do here. Move to inventory instead of delete. So there we go. We'll just put that in there, a little reminder for later. So it's kind of clear that we're just doing this temporarily. And let's make sure this is weapon. There we go. So now that's also going to return true after equipping a weapon. So if it returns true, we know the equip was successful. If it returns false, then both these casts fail and apparently didn't put in a valid equipment, which shouldn't even be possible at the moment because you can't instantiate an invalid equipment based on this pure virtual function. All right, so now that should allow us to equip stuff. So let's make a quick test. We got a player character here, and let's go p1.equip, and we need to equip an equipment. So let's give him some armor. So we're going to create a new armor here, a pointer, called we'll call it plate mail. Let's give him some plate, or maybe we'll call it full plate. Whatever you want to call it, it's fine. And we're going to just go equals new to create it, new armor. And we got to follow this constructor. Give it a name. We'll call it shiny plate armor. Sounds good. You can call it anything you want. And we need some stats. So actually, let's make the stats ahead of time. For stats, plate armor stats. And we'll just use the constructor on that as well. Well, let's see. It has a few different constructors we can use. But essentially, none of them allow you to, yeah, we've got operators and we could use a copy one, but none of them have this stuff lined up, so we can't do it like we do some of the others. We could put that in there, but we're not going to do that right now. Let me go back to the main here. So basically, we just have to fill it out after the fact, because these are all going to be defaults. If we go look at our core stats here, see that they're all going to be zeros, which is fine. We just want to change the armor and element resistance, basically. So we could say that full plate armor, or this plate armor stats dot armor equals, I don't know, we'll say 5. And we'll make another line here for element resistance. Now this is kind of tricky because you probably want to have different elements. It's like you would think plate armor probably doesn't have any electricity resistance, but we're going to kind of ignore that fact and we'll just say it's got 3, because it would stop like explosions and fire to some extent, but you know, it's plate armor, it heats up quick. That's too much logic for us to think about right now. But later, if we put different element types, we could put that on the stats as well, and different element resistances, like they do in Diablo and stuff. But for now, we're not going to do that. So let's just put this plate armor right here, plate armor stats. And so next we need a slot. Now, of course, this is a chest slot, so armor slot chest. And now we have that item, and we want to equip it. So we just go p1.equip that full plate armor, and that should do it. Now, what I was talking about earlier with this pointer and managing it. So what would happen here is if you now, let's just introduce an error case. All right, so if you go here and then you delete full plate armor, like so, it's gonna bug out our character a little bit because he should have equipment, but something that's not supposed to control it deleted it. So you gotta be careful about that. And there's a case for making this all unique pointers and stuff because of that, and designing the different system. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna scope this so that after we equip the armor, it's gonna delete this pointer and delete these core stats because we don't need them anymore. That's but it's not going to delete the data. When only the pointer itself is going out of scope. This data that it created with new, that doesn't automatically delete. Unless this was a unique pointer, then it would automatically delete. So, you know, there's other ways we could write this, but essentially putting this in a scope like this will make sure that nothing happens later to this data. It's just going to equip it and then move on. Now, only one person has this pointer, and that's the P1, so P1's got to manage it, which it does. It does manage it inside its own class. It does all the checking when you try to equip something else as needed, and if we delete this player character, it makes sure it gets rid of all this stuff as well. Make sure it deletes any armor and equipment. So that should clean up after itself properly. But we want to just check now, because now we can do a few more cool things. And I guess we'll just keep going with this till it's finished. I know it's kind of long, but we don't want to leave it off. We have this function get total armor and get total element resistance. And get all these get totals. They should now include whatever you're getting from your armor. Because right now, I think they're just your base stats and your buffs. But now we also want to include the armor. And we could even say what their equipment is. So, yeah, that's level up. And we'll just design some quick little see out here. That's just the level up buffing of stone shield. I don't know, what is this, a warrior? I don't know if we wanted stone shield. That's fine, whatever. We'll just leave it. I think that was a cleric thing. But now we're warrior, so, yeah. Yeah, maybe these buffs should be pointers, and we should be doing them like we're doing this armor as well. So, you know, as you go, sometimes you come up with better systems and you want to go back and redo your old ones. And yeah, that's kind of what we're running into. But it's good to know the many different ways and the advantages and disadvantages of both. But let's call this equipment here, or just armor in general. And we'll just go through all the armor. Now we're not using a vector. We're using raw arrays here that we're managing on our own. So we can't use this auto thing like we were doing with abilities. Although we could, you know, I'm not going to do this right now, but we could say, we could make these vectors of equipment pointers and manage it that way. But I do want to teach some raw arrays too. They're important to know. You don't see them as much anymore, but you know, if you're coding in C and stuff, that's the way to do it. You don't have access to vector. Vector essentially does the same thing. It just handles a lot of this behind the scenes that we're doing very manually. All right, let's go back to our main. And let's just spit out this armor. But we essentially want to do the same thing here for, we'll just use auto here. We'll use I, started at 0. My I is less than armor slot. And we want the num slots here again. Because we essentially want to go through all the slots. And we'll do the same thing. We'll check if it's null. If we need the character, cp1 dot. We don't have any public function to get the armor. Those are all private. So maybe we want that. Another thing we'd have to design if we want to show all the specific names. But we could do that. We could just do get armor, and then maybe we pass in the ID of which one we want to get. And maybe we could just return a const pointer. And I don't know if we talked about const pointers, but let's just design this function here, because we want a way to display you know, armor and all its stats and stuff. We're going to want that eventually, no matter what. So let's go back to our player character, and under our getters, where's our getters? Oh, this I guess needs to probably move up here. So there's a bunch of them. Let's just go down to the bottom and head down here, and it's going to return an equipment pointer, basically. So, well, this one will return an armor pointer. We could make it more modular and return an equipment pointer, but well, let's just return an armor pointer for now. And this is just going to be get armor. Now we want this to be a const pointer. A const pointer will say whoever gets this pointer is not allowed to modify whatever it's pointing to. They could still use const cast and cast away the const and modify it anyway, because C++ is powerful like that. But at least it being const will not allow them to do it easily, and it will tell them basically, hey, this is not designed for you to change it here. Basically, if you want to change it, you need to use this equip function. And it should be that simple. Yeah. I'm going to skip around back to main real quick here, because I just realized equip returns a bool, and we just want to make sure that this doesn't fail. If it returns true, it's successful. I don't know. You know, do we really need that right here? Not really. This is complainant. Player character has no member equip. Oh, it's because we're designing more stuff and haven't compiled. But we could say, we'll just say here, equip success. And we'll maybe make an else case for equip fail. Just a quick little notification, equip fail. And since we're returning the bool, we might as well. But when we're designing our actual game, we might use these differently. This is sort of just like a quick test here. All right, let's go back down here and just kind of keep working on this here. So get armor. What's it going to do? It's going to return. Oh yeah, we need to specify. I guess it wants unsigned long here. We'll put I. Unsigned. That's what these arrays want. We'll just return equipped armor at I. Now, it's important to note, return value does not match. Yeah, I guess we want to const cast this to armor. There. Like that. Const cast can only adjust type quantifiers and not change the underlying type. Okay, because these are what? They're equipment, essentially. So it's a little confused about that. So it's not gonna be able to return equipment here. So that's something we need to think about. So we'll have to actually go equipment. Right here. And let's see if this works. I guess we also have to call this equip. And that works. I don't know if we actually need const here. It might imply that automatically. So let's just try it like this. Yeah, that's fine. It's gonna apply that automatically. Yeah, const cast might actually mess things up. But yeah, read more about const cast if you're not sure about it. But basically, it just changes whether it's currently const or not. It's typically pretty dangerous and you should avoid it. But in some cases, you might need it. Okay, so this is going to return a const pointer to equipment. And equipment can be either armor or weapon. So this is just going to return equipped armor at I. So if this is null, this is just going to return a null pointer. And that's fine, because over here, we want to be able to just check that when needed. Because this is going to check if it's null. Get armor, if it returns null, then it's going to do nothing. And then not say anything. If it returns non-null, we could just say its name. Well, we need to, I guess we need to cast it to something, don't we? Armor. We'll just call it a temp pointer here. And just, you know, I guess it's going to be const. Yeah. We'll just go like this. Okay. So what's the problem here? Well, we got a warning with this I. Not a huge deal. I guess it wants unsigned long to match this armor slot, and we can cast this. Well, let's just do some casting. We'll just call this end. Let's just keep it simpler. This is only temporary code, and we'll cast this to an end, and then it should be happy. Now this one, we're making a new armor pointer called temp, and we're gonna fill it out with this. It cannot initialize. So we got to think, how do we want to do this? Value type of const equipment. I don't use to initialize entity type armor. Well, this is returning an equipment. All right, so we're doing some dangerous things here. We want get armor to return a const so that they can't modify it, essentially. But we could just return a copy of the data instead. That way, yeah, they can modify it, but it's not going to modify the underlying one. So let's just do this. Let's do this instead. We'll say it returns an armor of equipped armor. I guess we got to cast this to dynamic cast into armor pointer. Equipped armor. That's just because it's equipment, so we're not allowed to return it. And if we just put a star here, that should take care of it. Now, why doesn't it like this? No suitable conversion from armor star to armor. We just need to dereference it. And that should do it. Does it like the dereference? No, it doesn't. I think basically we're just going to need a null check here is one of the main things. But if we just want to return a copy of the underlying data, I guess we have to maybe design this in a different way, like armor. We'll do a non-pointer version of it. All right, so, but we deleted the default constructor. So this gets a little tricky to just do it like this, and we have to really think about what we're doing here. All right, so we're just going to go with this hacky method for now, and it seems to work okay. But it's a bit dangerous because we don't have const here. So we can dynamic cast to an armor and return it. just like so, as an equipment. But if we put constant here, it still seems to be somewhat happy. So let's just try this, and let's maybe try a few different things, and feel free to try some on your own to learn. But if we're returning like that, that's great. Well, let's just see if we just try to return equipped armor at I directly, no conversions, anything. That's also happy. So if we do it like this, then when we get this, we need to cast it to armor. Okay, so let's go back to our main. And here we have where we're going through the different armors. And we go through them. We do a get armor, dynamic cast it to armor, and see if it succeeds. And if it does, so if temp is not null, then we say the name. This seems to build. Yeah. But will it work correctly? I think it will. Let's go ahead and give it a go. And there we go. Armor, shiny plate armor. And this is getting a bit dangerous, but at least we've made this const here, so we can't accidentally modify it. And let's just see what happens if we do this dynamic cast return and hit play. Still no errors, still the same result. So these work, but they're a little dangerous. If we want to make it less dangerous, we need to make that const right there. Let's see if that works. No, that one fails because cannot use dynamic cast from const equipment to armor. So it doesn't like it when it's const because it doesn't allow the changing of the pointer. But yeah, let's try taking const off of that and see if it does anything different. Nope, still fails. So a little tricky here, a little hacky, but we can get it to work, and you just got to be really careful about this. Ideally, we do want this to be const. We're returning a pointer and we don't want them to change the data. But the current problem with this is it's a getter. And if we wanted to, we could say temp.stats.armor equals 10. And we could just straight up modify the armor. But it's not letting us because this is const. If we took this const away, it now lets us. So we could say here, let's just go with armor. Or we gotta go stats dot. Let's just save the armor just so we can see. Name, maybe on this. So we've got armor, we've got name. I'm just thinking about formatting here a little bit. Let's put a space over and then save. Like that. And we'll do the same thing here. And we'll have a name and then it's armor. Maybe we'll put a dash under that one. That way if we get multiple pieces of armor, because this is going to go through all our armor slots. So let's just test this. And now we know that when we created the armor, it only had 5. So let's see if it lets us modify it through that getter, which it should, but it throws an exception. So why is it throwing an exception here? Well, because when it's going through this armor, sometimes it's going to be null. And we're not allowed to just edit stuff. So we would actually have to do this after the null check. That way, and that's, some people get confused on those errors, but yeah, if you're editing null pointers, it's going to throw a crash of some sort. So you got to do a null check first, basically. And there we go. Shiny plate armor with 10. So we're not supposed to modify it, so we should be just doing const here, and then this bugs out. Yeah, ideally, like I was saying, we want this to be const here, but it doesn't seem to like dynamic cast in that case. So maybe we could play around with it. If you know the quick answer to make this better, feel free to edit from line 253 here on GitHub. I always check for pull requests before recording a new episode. So you can change it if you want. But for now, we're going to stick with this, and we're just going to be really careful about how we get the pointer. We're going to make it const right away. But let's go ahead and let's throw him another piece of equipment here just to show what happens when we have multiple pieces of equipment. And this time, instead of full plate, let's just go with this day leather helm, I guess. Leather helm. And we want different stats here. Leather, we'll just call it leather helm stats. There we go. And let's just lower these. Maybe it's got 1 armor, 1 element resist, and put that in here. Put this name here to equip, and it's going to go out of scope like before, so we can't keep changing things. Oh, this slot is different, and this name is different. So, kind of factoring these out. Leather helmet. We'll call it plain. Give it little more of a name. And first of all, let's leave this chest and see what happens. Let's just make sure it overwrites, because if you have one equipped already and you equip another chest, it should delete the previous one, right? Let's just make sure that doesn't have an error. Yeah, it looks good. Looks like we have a plain leather helm with -1 armor. So something's a little buggy there. It shouldn't have -1 armor. Not sure why it did that. Oh, it's just a dash. It's 1 armor. We just have a dash there, so it made it look like a -1. I guess that's a little confusing. Maybe we'll make it this instead. All right, so it had 1 armor. That's working correctly. It scared me for a sec. I was like, uh-oh. So there we go. And maybe we should just say armor. We should just literally say armor. But we should probably also say slot. This is just to see if it works, and it seems to work fine. It is replacing. So now let's change it to a helmet like it's actually intended. So now we should both have a chest. We should have this full plate chest, and we should have a leather helm. So when we hit play here, boom, we got both armor. We got plain leather helmet, armor 1, shiny plate, armor 2. And oh, let's check one other thing. The armor on our guy still says 0 up here. So last thing I promise on this episode, I know it's been a long one, but it's been quite an important one, I feel like. And that's just the way some of these are going to be. Some are going to be quick, some are going to be long. But we just want to total all that up. So this is called get armor, but really it should be named like get equipped armor or something. Get equipped armor, and then we put at, because the at is this here, which they can just pass in a slot and it'll say it gets the armor at that slot, and that's going to be fine. And we essentially want to do the same thing for weapons. So I'm just going to copy paste this down. Get equipped weapon at, and this one we're going to cast to a weapon and call it equipped weapons. But it essentially works the same. They won't be able to. This will fail to cast to armor, so you can't mess these up, or you're going to get compiler errors. Basically, it's going to be the point here. But now we do have a get total armor, which calls PC class get total armor, and it's going to get your base armor and stuff from the buffs. So the buffs are tied to a PC class because there's a vector of them in the player character delegate up at the top. But the armor, well, we're doing that all in this player character down here, so we actually need to total that up a little bit differently, which we can do. So we do want this armor from all their class stuff, because maybe they've got, I don't know, some special class ability that gives them more. But we just need to total up all the armor, and we can do that by going through a loop, just like one of these. Go through all their armor slot loops. Weapons could, in theory, have some armor on them too, but we're going to pretend that they don't. So get all armor from equipped armor. Let's do that first. And we're just going to total it up in a stat type. Stat type armor from armor. That's a neat variable name, isn't it? And we're going to start it out at 0, of course. And we just need to total these up. This here should be fine. We need to have this actually be a type. Just going to leave it. Auto's fine. And check equipped armor. No, we're not going to delete this time. If it's not null, then we plus it together. Plus equals whatever one we're at. Equipped armor at that slot. So if it's not null, we just keep adding to it. Dot stats, right? Or I guess it's a pointer, so it's dot stats dot armor. There we go. And that should just total up all the armor. And we need to just add it at the end here. Armor from armor. There we go. So that'll just total up all the armor of everything you have equipped and return it all at once, along with the PC class's armor from their buffs and stuff. And there we go. Now get total armor should work correctly. And you're probably starting to see the point of this player character class a little more. So if we go, this is kind of weird because, okay, here's our level 2 warrior. Let's just look at this highlighted area only. Their total armor is 6 because they're getting, well, 1 from the leather and 5 from the plate. So that seems correct. And currently their class doesn't give them any bonus, but if it did, it would also be in there. So yeah, that's it. You can see how to basically extrapolate all of this for the element resistance, which we technically need to do, except instead of armor from armor, it's going to be resist from armor. So we'll just rename this So resist from armor, and total this up, and element resist here. But we essentially do this for all the stats now. We would want to get all the stats for like well, the base is going to stay the same, but the totals now we also want to get all of it from all our equipment as well. And you can imagine how to do that. It's just basically these same loops and the same thing, except we'd be sure to get the right stat and return it with it all totaled together like that. So I'm sure you can imagine, and why don't you just do that as a practice if you're following along. Just do this for all these with strength, intellect, and agility as well. And I will include it in the code, but I'm not going to include it in the episode because it's at this point kind of redundant for me to do that same thing over and over. Let's go back to our main one more time. And yeah, I don't know. These stats break into a new line is, yeah, it's kind of whatever at this point. But there we go. We have name. Maybe we'll just put in like parentheses here. We'll just do like a little thing like A for armor there, just to kind of put it all in one line. It's a little formatting stuff, not something you really need to do. But we could do this. Well, what if we don't even want a new line here? We just want an R, and then we'll say the resistances that you're getting from it too. So you can just kind of see the stats from it basically. And then a new line. And we'll see what that looks like. All right, so now this should total up better. Let's look at the level 2. There he is at level 2. And we can see he's got armor, or these two, and it shows their stats with an A and an R. We got a space that we don't need it in parentheses, but you can format that however you like. And really, it's still temp code. In the long run, we want to have a graphical interface, but we probably still do want to get these the string data to put in our graphical interface to display text in a graphical format. This whole console thing, I know I've said it a million times, but just want to reiterate that it's literally just for testing at this time. It's not something we plan on using in the very end, unless, well, I guess it's up to the end user. If you just want to have a text-only RPG, hey, that's a thing. Apparently those, those do fine. Some people like those. They might be fun to play in some cases. But as you can see, it's essentially doing what it's supposed to do. We got the resists, we got armor. The resist is 9. Why so much resist? Oh, I guess we're getting some from our level up, because resist is 4 at level 1. Resist is 9 at level 2. And that's probably from Stone Shield, I think, because we got level 2. Let's just look at this real quick. Back into main. Where's main? Here we go. Big test case here. Yeah, we make our warrior. We equip a few things. And then we show all his stats, basically, and all his abilities. Now, one of the abilities you get, we have down here that we're leveling up on level 2, because this, goes through this twice. This armor buff. So, if we go look at this buff, what we got? We got a name and then a 10-0005. What is this? So we can look at this and see what it's doing based on how these buffs are designed. So name, oh, it's giving us a bunch of strength, which we don't intend. We actually changed how this works a little bit. Element resists strength, intellect, agility, armor, element resistance. So actually, this should be a little bit different now, but you probably get the point. So you gotta be careful about how you're designing those. And design buffs as they're actually intended. All right, so let's go back to the main. Let's just change the stone shield to make it actually give you armor, because that makes sense. Let's call it thick skin. Warriors are tough. They have some thick skin. And let's see, this was strength, intellect, agility. Let's give them a little bit of armor here. Let's give them 3 armor, 3, or let's just do 2. 2 armor, 2 magic resist. So we'll say warriors at level 2 get this thick skin ability. Just because. It's just an example for now, and we just want to see that it actually works and populates. So 6 and 4 based on the armor and plate there, or the leather and plate, and then they go up by 2 thanks to the abilities. And it's saying power attack. Why does it say power attack? Oh yeah. Well, we're not saying the buffs anywhere. This is a buff. But if we look at our player character, yeah, we have the warrior designed in a way. Let's find warrior here. We have the warrior designed in a way where when he levels up to 2, he gets power attack. So that's a permanent ability he gets. but the buff is temporary. Now, of course, we still need to work on those buffs to give them a duration, and we'll do that once we start doing combat and there's actual rounds ticking. Then we'll have buffs wear off when they're supposed to wear off. All right, hope you've enjoyed the episode. Hope you learned a lot, especially about pointers. This has probably been incredibly valuable about pointers. If you don't know about them, hopefully you know a lot more and understand a lot more. And I'll see you in the next episode. Peace out, guys.